You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We have Steve Bucci with the Heritage Foundation on the line now. So, Stephen, first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us again on the Final Say Radio Show. It's always great to have you on board with us.
Well, thanks for having me back.
And, every time we speak with you, we never have a shortage of issues and conflicts that we could discuss. And, of course, I think it seems to be getting worse day by day, not better, unfortunately. But we need experts like you to help break down and analyze the situation on the ground. So thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'll do the best I can to try and help.
Well, we have a few things here. I think the most pressing right now is the rise of ISIS, which we saw moving down from Syria into Iraq, making significant gains. I think the administration has been completely caught off guard. They never saw this coming, I don't believe. And they certainly, I think everyone's been caught off guard at the speed and the violence and the progress made by ISIS, I guess now that we could refer to it as IS. And so we've seen the humanitarian action by the administration, and we've also seen a few I guess, strategically placed missiles on some armor or weaponry that ISIS or IS has in their hands. So the question would be, Steve, what is the correct policy that we should be looking at? What type of involvement, whether it be putting more boots on the ground, trying to form a coalition to deal with IS, or what would your suggestions be?
I guess it's not fair just to say all of the above.
Well, it's probably the right answer, though.
No, seriously. First, I'm not a big fan of this particular administration, but I have to at least give them sympathy for the speed at which ISIS, pivoted from being a small, pretty much defeated organization in Iraq to operating in Syria, rebuilding itself, getting a bunch of new foreign fighters involved, people with more training and getting more equipment in Syria, and then pivoting back to Iraq in a way that caught everybody by surprise. I don't think there's any analyst out there who, with a straight face, can say, yeah, we knew this was going to happen just this way. But that said, what we're trying to do, again, kudos for taking some action, because for a while they weren't taking any, and trying to relieve the Yazidis up on Mount Sinjar, that was the right thing to do. It helped as far as, we know so far, and starting to hit the targets are all positive steps. I don't think that is enough to really turn this thing around. And the reason, and I'm sorry for going so long, but these guys are a serious threat, not just to Iraq, but to the region. And it's going to take a more comprehensive strategy to address them, and it's something that we need to do. It really isn't, in my mind, an option. It's something that must be done if we're going to protect our national interests and frankly, the interests of most of our allies in that region.
I couldn't agree with you more. Just a few things here. One is the Yazidis. We certainly, I don't know how we could sit back and watch that happen after all the times that we've watched the genocide in various places, including Africa and Darfur and so on and so forth, where after the fact and 1 million people are slaughtered, that the world's, just shocked and appalled, and we could never let this happen again until, of course, it happens again. And so I'm glad that he did do that. Also, I would say the Kurds, we've worked well with the Kurds in the past. Of course, it's been two-way support. We have to prop them up. And I think that the Kurds, first of all, the Kurds are the ones that are in the fight. And I think we have to give them the tools necessary to continue to do so because, in a sense, they are the boots on the ground. The other things are, just to mention real quick, we have to understand the involvement of Iran in this and of Iran in Iraq. Also, we have to maintain Jordan as a stable government, and we have to figure out how to help support a more stable government in Baghdad, because all of those lend to at least slowing down or stopping what I would consider to be losing right now. And then from there, we can move forward to a winning strategy.
And I agree 100%. The change in the government that's coming about in Baghdad will be a huge help. It'll hopefully wean back some of the Sunni tribesmen out in Anbar province that, because of their animus towards the al-Maliki government, that they went with ISIS, even though frankly they're not exactly in agreement with them theologically or in methodology, and some of them are already starting to chafe underneath their rather strident rule. So I really think what we need, though, is you do need boots on the ground. The air by itself, we showed in Kosovo, is not enough. But it doesn't necessarily have to be American boots on the ground. They could be other people's boots, and in this case, I think should be. We should help get the Iraqi military, the units that show some promise, back up on their feet with now less sectarian leadership. We should definitely continue what we started with the Kurds, give them some support, and even some of the confessional militias, that both the Sunni and the Shia, that have now are starting to stand up to face ISIS. We need to help get those people equipment, and then we need to embed our special operations forces with those units, much like the model we used at the beginning of the war in Afghanistan, where we went in with a very small footprint but a lot of air assets that were controlled by the Americans on the ground. Because when you have a bunch of different parts like this fighting a common enemy, you run the risk of somebody calling in an airstrike on a target, and it's really not ISIS, it's one of their local rivals. And we've got to avoid that sort of thing, and we can do that with American SOF controlling that air. And hopefully we also get some folks from other countries in, whether they be Saudis, Jordanians, Turks, and some of our NATO allies, the Brits and the French, at least to contribute air, if not their special operations forces also. I think if we do that, we can actually make a goal of destroying ISIS, and that should be the goal in this situation.
I think that's a brilliant analysis. In fact, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, I want to take this to 100,000 feet for a moment, but I think you really set me up perfect. We have not only a complete lack of a global strategy from a foreign policy and particularly from a national security policy perspective, but we moved away from this idea we maintained for a long time of being able to fight two major wars simultaneously. And I think what we've just realized right now, forget the pivot to Asia and everything going on there, Chinese hegemony, et cetera, but we basically can't deal with what's happening in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and there's plenty of pockets all over the world. So would you suggest that the missing aspect of this conversation is to go back to not only having that, let's say, two-front war capacity, but that we should be something like a 2x3 plan where we ought to be able to handle other places like this, considerations like this, where we need to have a carrier or land-based air attack coupled with special forces as part of that secondary. I want to get your feel on that, again, from our total military readiness.
Well, I for a long time have been, ringing the bell that we took a small military, but a very, very skilled, extremely experienced one, and we're letting it lay fallow, and they're going to start atrophying as far as their capabilities and readiness. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but if we keep going on the budgetary track we're on, it's going to happen, and we really can't let it, because even though we can say we're not going to fight any big land wars, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, the bad guys get a vote, and we are the only global leader. It doesn't mean we have to do everything, but we've got to lead, and right now we don't have the actual capability to do that in multiple places, and clearly we don't have the sort of leadership intentions to do that in a lot of places. And while I love quoting the Washington Post, it's something that a heritage analyst doesn't get to do very often, but they said that this particular president bases his foreign policy on the way he thinks the world should be, not on the way the world is. And that's unfortunate, because then we run into situations like this where we're kind of stuck, because the bad guys do get a vote. Putin stirs things up in the Ukraine. China starts messing around in the South China Sea. The ISIS decides they're going to set up a caliphate in the middle of Syria and Iraq. We've got to respond to these things, and we need to do it capably so that we can garner the followers and the help from other countries, because they're not going to do it absent the United States leadership.
Yeah, you set me up perfectly again. It's funny. I often joke with some of my liberal friends, and I say, the difference between us is that, you think with your heart, I think with my brain, and the fact of the matter is, bad guys don't think at all. They just want to do you harm, and you have to be sober about this. Wishing the world better doesn't make it so. You prepare for war is the best way to have peace. But anyway, with that in mind, one of the things that I think is very troubling on our front is a significant portion of our population seems to have a sick sort of mindset where they seem to be empathizing, and quite frankly, I believe our president does the same, empathizing with the bad guys, like Hamas, like the Muslim Brotherhood, etc. And I wanted to get your take, because from a policy perspective, no matter what even our military capabilities are, if we don't have the wherewithal to go after that, how are we prepared to do, to address this? In other words, if we don't have the political will, does it even matter if we have the tools?
No, it doesn't. The political will is clearly the long pole in the tent here. And, I'm not a conspiracy theory kind of guy. I'm not saying president's a Muslim sleeper agent or anything like that. Frankly, I find that not terribly helpful when people raise those issues. But he really seems to believe that if he's just nice and deferential to all these bad guys around the world, that they'll come and play nice with him. And I'm sorry, they don't. That's not the way the world works. These, in some cases, are seriously bad people. ISIS are bad people. They are the Khmer Rouge of the 21st century, who are very comfortable cutting off heads, chopping up children, for goodness sake, to make their point about their particular ideology. People like that are not going to come to the table and negotiate. Hamas, when they start with a demand of, we'll take all this blockade off of us, not because they want to live free, but because they want to be able to get more rockets to shoot at Israel, it's kind of a tough negotiating thing. And, our president needs to understand that there are bad people out there that can only be confronted by hard power. I love soft power. I think it's important. It's been neglected in the past, but you can't go all the way to the other extreme and think you can get away with only using soft power and not have that strength and ability to respond in a muscular way. America needs to have that, and it needs to be effective, but then we've got to have leaders that are willing to use it and who know how to use it effectively. And right now we're kind of in short supply of that last piece.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I want to mention something that I think is important to understand for our listeners. You can go back to 1979 when all the chaos went down in Iran and other places, but the extreme Islamists themselves attacked the Grand Mosque and other mosques within their holiest of cities and waged war on their own people. And they desecrated some of the most significant sites of their religion. So this isn't just them against us. This is them against anyone who doesn't subscribe to what they are believing in. And we have to understand that, and we have to understand that this isn't just something new that developed over the last year. This is decades old, if not hundreds of years old, if not 1,000 years old. And we have to go back and re-study our history in going forward. But I'd like to also add, and I think this is one of our biggest failures under this administration and in recent years, and that is what we have been doing with our nuclear arsenal and signing things such as the START Treaty, because we're talking about security. There is no greater security for the United States than being the most advanced nuclear military and keeping ahead of everyone. And we have to understand that we are not just competing with one individual nation. We are competing against the combination of, say, North Korea, Russia, China, and whoever else you want to add into that mix. So it's we have to look at it as an us against them, which brings up what you both mentioned, is being able to operate on multiple fronts and then some.
Yeah, and keep in mind, in the military, we have a thing, in the Army at least, that we refer to as the final protective fires. When you're trying to defend yourself, at a certain point, you give a signal that tells everybody to basically, this is it. If we don't stop them now, we're in deep trouble. For the United States of America, those final protective fires are our nuclear deterrent and our now still relatively nascent missile defense capability. And, those things don't affect every terrorist that's out there. They're not worried about that. But there's some pretty significant potential adversaries out there that are deterred by those two things. And if we don't keep them modernized, if we don't continue to develop particularly the missile defense piece and improve it, people are going to take advantage of that. And we really are irresponsible if we allow that to happen. You can't just allocate money in the budget and then not spend it on those things. You've got to spend the money. You've got to keep it modernized. You've got to keep it cutting edge, or there could be a big, big price to pay in the future.
Sure. Well, as far as missile defense goes, I think it's a great deterrent for us and a defense system while we're engaged in for what lack of a better word, the global war on terror. But we've also seen it demonstrated in helping Israel defend itself against the rockets of Gaza. Now, just imagine Hamas was able to more accurately shoot and were willing to shoot off more at one time. That would be a pretty large and significant test to the Israeli Defense Forces. And, I think that we need to be looking at these systems and implementing them now, not when the problem comes about. And, we should learn from what Israel's going through.
Absolutely. It is way too late to start debating where you're going to build a missile defense site or a radar site when the rockets and the missiles are already coming at you. And we need to do it now, and it is an investment, I realize, but it's one that can give our people a significant amount of comfort and protection, and then that allows our country to have some flexibility in the actions it takes. If Israel didn't have the Iron Dome system, they would have had to be much more destructive and much less willing to do any sort of ceasefire talks than they were, because they could protect their own people. If they had lost thousands of people to Hamas rockets, they would have only had one legitimate response, and it would have been to go in and flatten Gaza, and thousands of more innocent people would get killed. Because Israel can protect itself with the Iron Dome, it has the flexibility to be, frankly, kind of altruistic towards the Palestinian people in general, even though they're going after Hamas in particular. That needs to be recognized and acknowledged. If you can protect yourself, you can take more chances and therefore, negotiate with a lot more responsibility than if you can't. When all you can do is strike back, that's what you're going to do.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, Eddie, because it's the exact opposite of what the sort of Jimmy Carter-era Democrats threw in the face of Ronald Reagan when he first brought up the Star Wars defense in the first place. And, of course, they were wrong, and Reagan was right. But I wanted to bring it up in a slightly different context. Is I look at what Israel was facing as a critical thing for the U.S. to be watching, because make no mistake, even from their own words, one of the things that the Iranians think they can get away with is firing a salvo of maybe 50 or 100 missiles at one of our carriers, knowing maybe the last 2 or 3 or 5 get through. And when an American carrier hits the floor in the Persian Gulf or anywhere around this world, the balance of power will change exponentially, in my opinion.
it'll change, and I hope that if, God forbid, that happens, that the leadership in the White House will do what it needs to do to reestablish that balance of power by eliminating whoever has taken that step. And I know I'm talking big stick kind of things here, but we need to be ready to do that. And the only way you stop countries like Iran from considering those sort of strategies is to build into them pretty clearly what's going to happen if you do it. And without that sort of clarity, they can miscalculate, and then people die, and then you have to make a decision that you don't want to make, and nobody wants to see that happen.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, we spend a lot of time reading all the different analysis of that Heritage does, and of course we pay attention to your budget flip books and all the charts. And you mentioned the investment in missile system, and I would say, we're spending at near low, if not low levels of a comparison of our GDP on the military right now. And I think that we should reverse that course and make the investment in our national security, because that's what the federal government's supposed to do. And perhaps leave it up to the states or the individuals to start taking responsibility for their own financial problems.
I agree. Everybody always, as soon as you say that, they think you're trying to be a shill for the defense industry. That's not what we're saying. We should not just, open the windows of heaven and pour out money and spend irresponsibly. We need to make sure that we build as much efficiency into the Pentagon system as possible. But I have to tell you, just letting them continue to spend money in the inefficient way that's mandated by law, but give them less money to spend, I guess in some perverse mathematical formula that's more efficient than what they're doing now, but it doesn't help us in defense. We need to find efficiencies, save money in the way the Pentagon spends its money, but then take that money and invest it in our defense and improvements in our defense and readiness so that the federal government can do its constitutionally mandated role of providing for the common defense. I always use this, and people probably get mad at me, but I'm sorry, Meals on Wheels is really important. It's not as important as the national defense. There are other organizations that can and should be doing Meals on Wheels. The municipalities, the states, churches, other civilian organizations. But the only one who can do national defense is really the federal government, and it needs to get that priority realigned and re-recognized.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, we're unfortunately out of time for our show today. I want to thank you so much, Steve Bucci, for joining us in this wonderful discussion.
Super. Thank you for having me.
You can find Steve Bucci, that's Bucci, at heritage.org. He does some great stuff. Please follow him along. Okay, thank you, Steve.